Mike, by my count, we're going to be at 1,068 recordings after tonight's episode.
Yeah, that feels about right. I feel like I've listened to over 1,000 recordings in the last 3 years.
And that would be a lot of CDs.
Yeah. Well, I don't have all those CDs anymore. In fact, I was kind of lamenting the fact that there are all these new releases out, and then now the Gramophone Awards are out, and I kind of want to pick up some of those on CD, and I just don't have the cash on hand for it. I gotta start hustling.
This week I was thinking about the pricing of CDs. You know, there's 3 reasons to buy a CD.
Yeah.
Well, at least there used to be. Of course, the first reason was you wanted to listen to the music. But now with streaming, you don't have to buy the CD to hear the music, right? The second reason is you want to build your own physical collection that doesn't depend on the internet and distribution and all other things coming together forever for you to be able to listen to that.
Right.
And the third reason is to support the artists.
Yeah.
All of those are good reasons.
Except that you don't wind up supporting the artist either. Usually you support the record label
Mostly.
or
Right.
the record executives or whoever is getting the cash.
But now that you can listen to music by streaming, CDs should be less expensive. And a lot of them are. I was looking at my wish list of CDs that I have on Amazon. And for the U.S. prices, there are a lot of companies that are pricing their CDs in jazz at $15 or less.
That's pretty good.
That's not bad at all.
That's what they were like back in the 90s and stuff.
Right. Now, the problem is that looking at Amazon Japan, where we order from, not only are the prices high because of the weak yen, but it seems like they've factored in a little bit extra to cover shipping costs on there. Things do not compute, and they would end up costing almost twice as much for us in a number of cases. So I'm not too happy about that.
Yeah, you know, it's ridiculous if you order, say, something from Amazon in the U.S. and have it shipped to Japan. Like if you order like a bulk of items, you kind of save on the shipping. But Amazon Japan charges you like sort of has the shipping cost built into the price for each item. So you wind up spending a ton of money if you buy a load of CDs.
Well, if we bought all those CDs, that would have been about another $20,000 worth of recordings just for this podcast alone.
Yeah, and I think that would be money well spent.
It would be. Certainly, we've both got a lot more than that in our collections already anyway. But yeah, come on, Amazon. I'm watching you.
Yeah, right.
Anyway, you're listening to the Adult Music Podcast, the podcast with music for the mature mind. I'm your co-host, Russ.
And I'm your co-host, Mike.
And we're bringing you 6 recordings every episode, 3 in classical, 3 in jazz, and tonight some things in between maybe, constantly moving that recording count higher and higher and bringing you some things you won't find talked about in other places. This is going to be episode 183. Before we get going, we've got a little bit of sad news this evening, let me get over to the piano for the theme. On September 21st, we lost saxophone great Benny Golson, who passed away at the age of 95. Bebop, hard bop, saxophonist, composer, and arranger, his career stretched all the way back to the big bands of Lionel Hampton and Dizzy Gillespie. He played with Tad Dameron and Art Blakey and so many other greats over the years, too many to mention, really. And as a composer, he left the jazz catalog with many well-known tunes that are still played by jazz musicians to this day, including I Remember Clifford, in memory of the great trumpeter Clifford Brown, Blues March, Stablemates, Whisper Not, Killer Joe, and a lot of other tunes as well. He was an inspiration to many jazz musicians that are still out there playing today, and a great loss, but a life well lived, and 95's not bad. So rest in peace, Benny Golson.
Yeah, 95, you'd have to be pretty happy to reach that age, I would say.
Yeah.
Especially if you're all in good condition and things.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay, before we get into tonight's music, as always, in the episode description, you'll find links to Spotify, Apple Music, and Amazon Music for all the music that we're going to discuss. And at the top of the description, there's a link to the full episode playlist. That's all the music in one place on Deezer, CD quality streaming music from France. You can listen to the podcast on Deezer as well if you want to get everything in one place. If you can't see the full description or the recording list and links are not easy to access on whatever app you listen to us on, you can always come over and check us out on our host site. That's Podbean, PODBEAN.com. Everything is neat and easy to follow there. If you enjoy the podcast, please follow or subscribe wherever you listen to us. Tell a music-loving friend, musician friends. Help us grow our audience. If you take a moment to give us a ranking or write a short review, that also helps us get listed in the music category recommendations. Come on over and follow us on Facebook. We've got a page there. You can get extra info, more new releases throughout the week, see our interaction with artists. Leave a comment there if you like. And if you'd like to contact us directly with any comments or questions, we'd love to hear from you. Our email address is adultmusicpodcast, all one word, @gmail.com. We're going to play music samples from our selections this evening. And here is our fair use disclaimer. Music sample clips are for commentary and educational purposes. We recommend that listeners listen to the complete recordings, all of which are available on streaming services in the links provided. And we also suggest that if you enjoy the music, you consider purchasing the CDs or high-quality downloads to support the artists. And a little heads up before we get into this week's program, we found out, and we're all ready next week for the new Wranitzky recording.
Yeah, we've already got that scheduled for next week. Right. I haven't heard it yet, but I'm got it all queued up for probably tomorrow. We'll have to see.
Yeah, great. Number 7 in the series, so we're looking forward to that.
The Naxos series with Daniel Bernardson doing the notes and
Mark Stilitz conducting. That'll be interesting. So we've got that as a little preview for next week. But what about this week, Mike? What do we got going on?
We've got some stylistic dissonance going on, especially in the contemporary recording this week. But yeah, just some interesting kind of contrasts, I think, in the classical anyway. I think in the jazz too, to an extent.
Yeah.
All right, so our first album this week was a pretty intriguing release to me. It's called An Evening in Vienna, 1784. I really like these albums that have you imagine that you're in the past somewhere. I think part of the reason I'm attracted to classical music as well as just, literature and just the arts in general is they kind of make the past come alive quite a bit. People will read, like, say, Jane Austen novels and imagine themselves at tea on some estate in England in the 18th century or whatever. I think women love that, so they love those books. And this is an album that attempts to put us in a duke's, sort of estate or whatever. And his group is playing.
Quite a group, too.
It's quite a group. The 4 musicians happen to be, according to the notes here, the 4 composers that we're going to hear tonight. And they are Joseph Haydn. This is the imaginary performance, okay? Joseph Haydn on the first violin, Kstitel Vanjhal on the second violin, Karl Ditters von Dittersdorf on the cello, and none other than Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart on the viola. Now, Mozart played the violin as well as the keyboard. There's a very famous story where Haydn introduced his Opus 33 string quartets at a salon that Leopold Mozart and the young Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart were at, and they played through them. Haydn on first violin and Leopold Mozart, Mozart's father, on second violin, and Mozart played the viola, and somebody else played the cello. What a discovery this was for Wolfgang, who went on and dedicated 6 really amazing string quartets that I still to this day can't stop listening to and wondering about. He dedicated those 6 to Haydn, and they are spectacular. And we're going to hear one of those on this program, too. It's a pretty fantastic program. The artists, or the quartet, is the Bennewitz Quartet. They're 4 Czech people, and I'm going to have to say these names. Apologies ahead of time. Jakob Fischer, first violin. Stepan Jeznek, second violin. Jiří Pinkas, viola. And Stepan Dolezal, cello. Okay, I'm sure I didn't get those markings correct. But anyway, this is on the Supraphone label. 20 September 2024 was the release date. So only 9 days ago. This is 9 days old.
Wow.
We're
on the cutting edge, yeah.
On the edge. We're going to be on the edge again next week, too. Well, at least for one album. Anyway. All right. So we have a great program here. Now, the first quartet on the album is Joseph Haydn's string quartet. Now, okay, this is Opus 33, number 5. Now, this is the 5th of his famous Opus 33 quartets. Why are these famous? Because Haydn is known as the father of the string quartet. And with the Opus 33 quartets, he introduced the idea of the 4 members of the quartet as 4 individuals all conversing. So all of the lines are important. It isn't like the violin is playing and then the other 3 are accompanying him. So he really made the quartet a real artistic form with this. And Mozart took this and really ran with it too, because Mozart heard them that night that they performed them with Leopold, and they read through them at some musical meeting, which would have been a wonderful thing to be at. Anyway, there's a story of a famous tenor at the time who heard Haydn, Mozart, Dittersdorf, and Vanihal play in the string quartet, and he said they weren't very accomplished as musicians. Yeah, they were great composers, but they were probably, very good and very competent players, but they weren't probably virtuosi. And of course, Mozart was a virtuoso on the keyboard, probably not on the violin, although he played that too. That super genius guy. Anyway, Joseph Haydn. Now, I want to mention here on Deezer, this is listed as string quartet number 5. No composer listed. Without the booklet, we wouldn't know what this is. And in fact, on Supraphone's website, they have it listed as Haydn's 5th string quartet. It is not his 5th string quartet. It's the 5th of the Opus 33 quartets. It's actually his 41st quartet, according to the Hoboken number, which is kind of how those quartets are numbered. This is his Hoboken 3:41, the 5th of the Opus 33 quartets, which are landmarks in the history of Western music.
So much for metadata.
Right. Okay, so this quartet is nicknamed the How Do You Do Quartet because of the brief introductory bowing figure before the theme takes off in the first movement. I'll sample that, actually. Let's just hear the opening, and then I'll start talking about it. But listen to the first figure, and that's like the bow, the formal bow. Oh, how do you do? Nice to meet you. And then the talking starts, let's say. We get there to the second theme. Now, you wanted to notice, first of all, if you know these quartets, that's pretty fast. The Bennewitz Quartet pushed the tempo and play without vibrato. Okay, so this is a period instrument performance using those techniques. The instruments all register brightly on the recording, which has great detail and good room resonance, too. I'm just assuming Supraphone has changed their approach to recording, because we're getting really good sounding, like, room sound from them now, too. The instruments resonate in the room. It's pleasant to listen to, and the playing is exciting, but sounds in a hurry to get somewhere during faster passages, while in the slower second theme, the tempo actually seems to audibly slow down. Well, it's a slower passage, but it does sound like it's kind of consciously wants those two sections to contrast, and I think the contrast is written into the score anyway, so... It works well enough, though. When going into the development, the Bennewitz makes sure we hear the dissonance that swerves us into the new harmonies, by really leaning on it, which I liked. I like hearing those.
Yeah.
The Bennewitz Quartet also provides a heavy accent to the odd harmony that leads into the coda at 5 minutes and 33 seconds, and the piece ends calmly and courteously. It's a courteous piece, but with a lot of energy. Second movement, Largo e Cantabile, and this one has a nice flow to it at the beginning. Let's hear that. I really wanted you to hear that ending there that leads into the theme again. It's really odd because the music stops, it's done, you hear the cadence, and then there's that extra sort of mysterious da-da-dun, da-da-dun, da-da-dun. It's kind of a little creepy. I kind of like it. It really stands out. It's mostly on the sweet melodic side with only that unison line that I pointed out, breaking up the mood. There's a nice change of texture at 2 minutes and 55 seconds that the Bennewitz approach exposes in an ear-catching way. It introduces a more dramatic coda to the piece, which regains its footing at the end and finishes with that haunting unison line. Da-da-dun, da-da-dun, da-da-dun. Where did that come from? It's really interesting. And then it ends with a pizzicato. The third movement, a scherzo, marked allegro, has an odd upward rushing theme, and the line resolves with a gentle cadence. It's a sort of genteel CPE Bach. I mean, this sort of goofing around with the form seems to be something that Haydn really enjoyed doing as well. I suppose this sort of musical humor was in the air at the time. The both of them did it, and Mozart picked it up too. The Bennewitz Quartet give the section the appropriate amount of humor so that it comes across as amusing. I love the dancing trio in this movement, and I'm going to sample that part. This is around 1 minute and 15 seconds in. Back to the scherzo theme. That's that odd rising line with all those little hiccups in it. Haydn really liked doing that. And by the way, that trio, if you know the Mozart string quartets pretty well, you'll hear similar melodies and textures in that. These works really stuck with Mozart. In the quartets dedicated to Haydn, he took a lot of these textures and just sort of rewrote them into his own style and his own form. So you'll notice some of those Haydn fingerprints in those works. The nasal sound of the vibratoless strings makes it come across as more rustic. The phrasing is pretty quick, and we're not allowed to absorb the line completely before it's off to its next iteration. The scherzo comes back, as we heard, and there's a bit of a surprise ending to this movement, too. Finale marked allegretto, and Mozart adapted this theme for the final movement of his string quartet number 15 in D minor, Kochel 421/417b. It's the second of the ones he dedicated to Haydn. He really makes the theme much more elaborate. Here, the theme has a simpler, shorter form. It's bouncy and appealing, and is given a series of variations as it has in Mozart's quartet as well. I liked the sweetness of the high strings in the variation in the second minute, and that's what I'm going to sample. And off to another variation. There's a freshness not only to the movement, but to the playing as well. This will leave you in high spirits. It has a good rhythmic bounce up to the end, and even speeds to a gallop at 3 minutes and 44 seconds, the variation that leads the movement to its ending. Tracks 5 through 8, Jan Gzditel Vanyhal, string quartet number 2 in A major, opus 33. Again, this is not his second string quartet. I just said it was, but that's what it says on the listings here. Vanyhal published his quartets in sets of 6, so this is the second in his opus 33 set. He published at least 3 sets of string quartets before this, so this would be around number 20 or something like that. Anyway, track 5 is the first movement of the Vanyhal string quartet. in A major, Opus 33. This has a pleasant Haydn-esque opening. Let's hear it. Now, you want to keep in mind that in this era, string quartets were written for home consumption. So you would buy the score, and you and your family or friends would get together and play through them. And nobody saw the entire score. Each musician had only his line, so you didn't know what was coming. You didn't know what the harmony was going to be. So it was entertaining to do. It sounds like a lot of fun, really. There are a lot of little musical jokes in them, too. They just come up on you unexpectedly. The violin, you might have noticed, has the lead, and the rest of the quartet play chords. And that's the style Haydn broke with in his Opus 33 quartets. And after that, the cool composers all did it, too. All right, so they were the cool kids in the composing game there. Mozart, of course, being one of them. Still, Vani Hall has a pleasant style. The second theme has a light, dancing quality to it, beautifully articulated here. The development section remains pleasant despite skirting some dark tonal areas. The opening theme is already back at 3 minutes and 20 seconds, and the recapitulation progresses through its themes with lively energy provided by the Bennewitz Quartet. This performance sounds ideal. It's really paced beautifully and just sounds great. And I've never heard it before, so this is a nice listen. Track 6, Arietta 1, moving to Arietta 2. This has curling melodies opening the piece, mostly played by the violin, with the rest of the quartet providing harmony and occasionally stepping out to comment or provide a counterline. So this movement acts as the minuet or the scherzo movement. The second Arietta would be the trio, and it's played low in the violin's range and rises to the top. As in the minuet movement, the opening theme comes back here around the 3-minute mark. Track 7, Adagio sostenuto, the slow movement. This movement starts with a song-like melody in the violin, which we would expect. Let's hear that. The rest of the quartet creates a gentle wave-like motion for the theme to float over, as you heard. The movement again has a nice flow to it, a good tempo choice. It may be a quick tempo for Adagio, but it works well here, getting us into the flow of the rhythm. And it could be that I'm not familiar with this piece. I haven't heard many other recordings of it, so that's why I'm accepting it so readily. There's a contrasting B section that begins in the 2nd minute, and here the cello steps out to provide a counter melody to the violin. The opening theme then repeats in the 3rd minute. There's a coda at the end that brings us to some surprisingly darkening harmonies, but the theme, of course, finds its way out of that, and the violin gets a brief solo moment before the final cadence. Yeah, Vani Hall has some ideas to break up the expected here, as well as Haydn and Mozart, so good work to him. The 8th track is movement 4, Rondo, Allegro molto. The rondo theme is cheerful and upbeat, as most rondo themes are, and I like an upbeat rondo myself. Let's hear it. There's some impressive playing there from the first violin. You've got to wonder if people playing the score at home would give it such a giddy sort of feel. Anyway, this is played at a quick speed, as you heard, and it makes the virtuosity of the violin's line in the first departure, which we just heard, impressive. The movement is straightforward, with the brief rondo theme frequently returning in full. The theme slows a bit for the next variation so that when the rondo theme comes back, it sounds launched by some kind of spring mechanism. The cello gets a solo spot with a quick continuous line of eighth notes in the third minute, showing a bit of similar virtuosity to the violin when it followed the opening rondo theme in our sample. The rondo theme itself is back in higher spirits afterwards, and there's a slight quickening of tempo for the brief coda, leading to an exciting ending. Tracks 9 through 11, Karl Ditters von Dittersdorf, String Quartet No. 5 in E-flat major. It says again, Opus 33. Are these all Opus 33 quartets? I don't know. That's what it says in the booklet. I didn't actually double-check it. Anyway, this is also announced as KR 195. This is the fifth string quartet in the Opus 33 set of 6, but this is actually Dittersdorf's fifth string quartet because he only wrote 6. So this is correctly numbered. At least from the records I was able to find online, that's the case. He seems to have focused on concerti and symphonies rather than chamber music. The first movement, Allegro, this is a 3-movement quartet I should mention, and this is track 9 is the first movement. It has a chirpy opening, and the quick tempo and light sound make it sail. Let's hear that opening. Yeah, by the way, we use Deezer, and Deezer has these all listed as String Quartet No. 5, String Quartet No. 2, String Quartet No. 5. You have no idea what you're listening to. There's no composer listed. Anyway, if you're using Deezer, make sure you download the booklet from somewhere on the internet. There's a unison transition to the second theme here, which has some interesting figuration in the accompaniment. The second theme features a singing violin line over solemn church-like chords underneath. The material, however, is irrepressible and breaks out of this, going into a development with some quick moves through odd keys. We suddenly and rather surprisingly arrive back at the first theme in the second minute, with 2 minutes left to go. The solemn second theme really is odd, a total momentary character change that feels like it belongs in another movement. After the theme is finished, there's a high-spirited coda that leads to the end. Track 10 is a minuet non troppo presto, or not too fast. This has a pleasant bounce to it. The tempo seems pretty standard, and the music is comfortable to listen to. The trio is quicker and has the initial feel of a last movement allegro, but it slows a bit and gets into a repetitive rhythm and stationary harmony. The flowing minuet comes back with a subtle change, nicely played by both Dittersdorf the composer and the Bennewitz Quartet, our performers here. The final movement, track 11, this is movement 3, is Allegro. It's a high-speed theme played articulately here, the ensemble showing great virtuosic skill, and we'll have to hear that. We're going to hear the Bennewitz Quartet really take off. Here we go. Okay, we kind of get stuck there. You know, you want to imagine people playing this at home and you're in that situation and they're wondering what's coming, you know? it sounds really fun. Dittersdorf really loves extreme contrast, and in the first minute we hear a droning bass and a bagpipe-type melody from the violin. A quiet, veiled tone section follows this. It's an odd movement. Now, you didn't get a real feel for this just from the sample. You have to hear the whole movement to get this because there's a lot of contrast of styles in it. The Bennewitz are on top of every change and are very impressive here. The irrepressible opening theme is back after this, still flying by at the appropriately quick tempo, with some sudden tapping on the brakes. The ending features a repeating high note in the violin. This quartet was an appealing discovery by Karl Ditters von Dittersdorf. Check that out. Tracks 12 through 15, a very famous quartet, closes the recording. Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart, string quartet number 19. They got this one right. In C major, the Dissonance Quartet, Koelschel 465. This is the sixth of the string quartets that Mozart dedicated to Haydn. Track 12, the first movement, is marked Adagio, moving to Allegro, and in fact, the Adagio, the introduction to this movement, is the reason why it's called the Dissonance Quartet, because it is very dissonant. It's chromatic, and it sounds really turgid and stuck. The cello comes out with a steady pulse, as the rest of the quartet play the chromatic harmonies in the introduction, but without the turgidity other ensembles tend to give it to communicate a feeling of being unable to move. The tempo again leans toward the fast side, and as a result we get a sense of steady movement, of inevitability. In fact, the quartet makes this opening more melodic in parts than most other quartets, who make the opening heavier and slower in order to contrast it with the sunny material that's coming. Let's hear this famous opening that gives the quartet its name. And it goes on for a while like that. Mozart used this approach a lot in the mid-1780s, where he'd start a piece darkly and then spring out of that darkness with high spirits. The main theme does indeed spring out. It happens at around the 1 minute and 55 second mark, and we'll skip ahead to hear that. And the music continues in another direction. I'm pretty impressed how the Bennewitz Quartet manages to get a lot of detail to be audible at this rather fast speed. You can pick it all up if you're concentrating. The tempo is very fast, though the themes have ample space to breathe and be enjoyed. The second theme of the exposition has a strong rhythm to it here, seeming like it's bounding on its feet to release excess energy. The exposition is repeated, and the pacing is kept up for the development section, where different keys are rapidly gone through with the sunniness of the harmony and rhythm never diminishing. Even excursions into the minor key keep up the energy. The development actually runs out of steam and pauses before the recapitulation of the opening themes start again. Right, that's part of Mozart's composition. It's not the quartet that's running out of steam, not the performers. The movement comes across as irrepressible, and the intro doesn't sound as turgid as it often does. The energy of the quartet in this movement is appealing and admirable. I especially like the rapidly pulsing quality of the cello at the very end of the movement. Track 13, the slow movement, Andante cantabile, this is the second movement. It's given a tight shape, partly achieved via the, again, slightly fast tempo. Other performances give this more charm by playing lightly. This is played at full bow strength and comes across with more force. The gorgeous trading of the cello and violin lines that stand out so much for me in this movement don't sound quite as gentle as I'd like them to be. What do you think? Let's sample this. This is going to be at around 2 minutes and 35 seconds into the movement. The opening melody comes back here. It's developed between the four voices a bit after it's stated clearly. We actually heard the return of it right at the end of that sample. One thing this performance gives me that hadn't registered before is how much melodic material the cello has. That quality is slightly emphasized in the movement, though the listener's ear is always on the multiple musical events happening throughout the movement. The cello's wave-like ostinato towards the end comes across more forcefully than usual, and makes for a dramatic approach to the end of the movement. Track 14, the Menuet, marked Allegro, starts with a light danciness, allowing the forte that follows to contrast fully. Early entry of the violin lines in the theme are emphasized in the performance. The trio section is played at a fast tempo and has a rushing quality to it. We hear a repeat of the Menuet at the end. Track 15, the fourth movement, Allegro molto. The theme has a chirpy, lively quality, well captured by the quartet, who also give a jolt with the sforzato in the middle of it. Again, it's pretty fast, but not so fast as to lose the charming character of the theme. Let's hear a sample. Sforzati figure often in this movement. A sforzato is like a forced chord, like a sudden accent. And they're played for maximum dramatic effect, startling the listener when they're heard. Such contrasts are they given in this performance. The tempo and relative high spirits are kept up throughout, though the forward movement keeps being interrupted by Mozart's pauses and sforzati. And again, this would be fun for the people playing at home. The movement ends with a great sense of energy. And that's the end of the album. I really loved the concept behind the program, the idea that people would get together and play a set of string quartets by different composers, in this case the composers themselves, each presenting one piece of their own music to the ensemble they form. It makes for enjoyable variety in the programming. The performances are all commendable. I especially like the Vanihal and Dittersdorf quartets, which sound like they're played at standard tempos and as a result come across with appeal, although they're played with energy. I just don't know them as well. The well-known Haydn and Mozart quartets are both played at tempos that lean heavily on the fast side, at least compared to older recordings, which I've been familiar with for 30 years now, or more. And while it makes the music come across with excitement, I always seem to lose a bit of emotional content that goes with the lesser breathing space that quicker tempos leave. That said, the quartet do well to leave some breathing space for the melodies at their chosen tempos, and all in all, this was an entertaining program with enjoyable performances, and even exciting.
Well, the idea of this historic string quartet performance with the composers is intriguing. It makes you interested right away. And then the content here reminds us, once again, how many well-regarded composers were active in any musical time period, but whose music today we don't get to hear all that often. Ronnie Hall and Dittersdorf music fits in really well in this Haydn and Mozart sandwich, I thought. The only thing that surprised me stylistically was the finale of the Dittersdorf. Make sure you listen to all of that. It's kind of interesting there. It goes on a detour. And then Mozart stands out by having the most ideas and development in his first long movement. He just shows he's got all these ideas and they're really well developed. Overall, the performance by the Bennewitz Quartet is classy and refined, really good balance between all of the parts, tone and phrasing, attention to dynamics. We get a lot of great speed here. And as you mentioned, the Supraphone sound is enhanced compared to the old days. The most recent recordings we've heard from them are sounding real kind of shimmering with some room ambiance there too.
Really enjoying that myself.
Yeah. A great idea for a program that includes these works that we don't always hear, and I enjoyed it a lot.
Yeah, I liked the creative programming myself. But I want to say, just before we go into the next recording, I'm noticing a trend in classical music toward faster tempos. We're hearing it in the Haydn symphonies that Giovanni Antonini is doing. In some cases, I think they're getting too fast. Not necessarily on this recording, though. There are fast tempos on the Bohemo Trio's Smetana and Schubert Piano Trio's album, and we talked about that a few weeks ago. And even last week's Fauré Requiem was on the fast side, a piece that you would think would take a slower tempo to achieve a meditative quality. I think this is happening because of the internet. It's sped up our lives. Now, if anybody saw the movie Koyaanisqatsi in the 1980s with the Philip Glass score, which is pretty much a bunch of images of how fast our lives are moving and how we're sort of out of balance, out of control. That's what Koyaanisqatsi means, life out of balance. And I realize that we live in a high-speed, fast information, instant satisfaction era, and that the quicker tempos may attract more young people with now shorter attention spans who want the excitement of hearing, fast virtuosic playing. Personally, though, I'm 59 now. I like to find rest in music, and while I've enjoyed many of these recordings with quick tempos, I miss the slower tempos of the past. No problem, I have CDs. I could go back to those if I want to hear them. But when you hear all these recordings with faster tempos, you tend to internalize them, and then when you go back to the older recordings, they start sounding too slow. So, because you get in line with the times we live in, too. I think we listen to classical music to connect a bit to the past and the slower lives people lived, too. I'd like to hear tempos that allow the music to breathe more and give the listener a chance to absorb what he's hearing to a greater degree. I think people need the opportunity to go to the countryside and move to the rhythms of nature when they put on a classical music album. The rhythms of nature are the rhythm that music was written to and played at before cities and the mechanization of them came into being. I mean, I like that in music too. It's exciting. But I don't want that to be everything. Let's take a chance and slow down tempos in classical music. And I bet there will be a reaction eventually that we'll start hearing slower tempos.
Sure.
In 5 years or so, maybe less. We'll have to see. Anyway, on to the next recording. I have gotten off my soapbox now. I'm ready to talk about the next recording. This is called the Estonian Cello, and there are two musicians here, Valle-Rasmus Roots on the cello and Sten Lassmann on the piano. This is on the Tocatta Next label. They are a branch of Tocatta Classics, and this came out on September 20th. The impetus for this recording was Sten Lassmann's desire to record the entirety of Heino Eller's cello works. I hope I said that right. I don't know if it's Heino or Heino, but it's Heino. Since these don't fill up the entire album, other composers were included in the program, and we're hearing the result here. It winds up being a tour through the music written for the cello in Estonia in the 20th century. The Estonian classical tradition is only 125 years old. And that's astonishing when you think about the mark that Estonian composers and musicians continue to make in the 21st century. Pianist Sten Lassmann writes that after finishing his project of recording all of Heino Eller's piano music on 9 Toccata Classics albums, he wanted to turn to this neglected part of Eller's output, his cello music. Heino Eller was the first professional composer in Estonia to successfully combine modernist and national idioms. The rest of the world was unaware of it, but Eller had a huge influence as a composition teacher in Estonia in the 20th century. And because of that, we should get to know his music more. So let's start. This is his cello music. We're hearing his complete cello music, I believe, on this album. Track 1, Old Dance in G major. These are all compositions by Eller. This is quasi-Baroque in its dance lilt, according to the notes, but I really don't hear it that way. The cello has a sweet tone on this charming piece. The cello is distanced from the microphone a bit, and there's a good amount of room ambience on it, as though we're in the audience listening in a medium-sized hall. The piano has some ambience on it, but sounds closer. The piano plays gently, though, so the cello is easily heard. So let's sample this new sound world. So it's a pretty traditional form as far as the music is shaped. There's a more active middle section to this work where the piano gets a look in with some melodic lines. The structure is A-B-A, and the opening dance-like theme is back after the middle section. Track 2, Prelude in G minor, from 1917. This is a standard work for Estonian cellists. It's got a Chopin prelude feel to it, especially due to the repeating piano chords. The cello plays a slow melody with some smoky, building passion to it. Let's hear the opening. And I'm sure everybody's noticing the beautiful singing tone that Valle-Rasmus Roots is getting on the cello. The music builds and speeds up for dramatic effect by the first minute. The cello rises in its register as the piece goes on and reaches for a climax by the second minute, which falls back into the opening chords section from. A nice effect. The piano chords keep their rhythm for most of the rest of the piece, only breaking down to add some drama to the end. Really like those Chopin preludes. The cello plays in a passionate, melodic way throughout. Track 3, Eller again, Poem in A-flat major, 1921. Lyrical, pastoral, with a lot of nuances. This has a sweet, charming melody, and it's immediately appealing. This is ideal for the end of the day. It sounds idyllic. It doesn't stay that way, though, building to a climax via a crescendo and rising lines by the 1 minute mark, then winding down from there. The cello ends its melody and the piano gets some time playing solo. At 1 minute and 57 seconds, the cello re-enters, and now the melody has some heaviness to it. There's a speeding up of figuration and another reach to a dramatic climax, reaching its peak at about the 3rd minute. The piece winds down from here, ending on a long sustained cello note and chiming figures from the piano. Track 4, Evening Song in G major. This is a solo piano original from 1921. This is inspired by a sunset at the beach in Toila, I don't know how to say that, on the northeastern coast of Estonia. The piano starts with some surprisingly heavy chords, and the cello comes in with the end-of-day weary melodic line. It's an attractive melody with some real emotion to it, drawn out by Valle-Rasmus Roots' committed playing. It's got a pretty ending on a high cello note. Track 5, Romance in G major from 1924. The piano begins with a forte set of descending figures, and the cello enters bringing its melody in the opposite direction. The cello's theme goes into some interesting harmonic areas, adding psychological weight to the composition. There's a rather impressive solo cello descent that ushers in a new dramatic section that suddenly lightens up when the cello re-enters with a lighter tone. The piano settles into repeated arpeggiated chords as the cello emotes, then gets a rising accompaniment to the high end as the cello settles on its final high note. Track 6, Andante Serioso in D minor from 1931. This piece has an interesting start. The piano starts staccato and settles into a march-like rhythm as the piano plays a theme that's constantly moving upward into new keys. At 1 minute and 36 seconds, the tension winds down and the cello plays an attractive, heartfelt melody, and it's that melody that I want to sample. Build up and a slight release of tension by the end of the sample. The opening comes back in the second minute and we hear a repeat of that section. This time the section arrives at a cadence into the tonic key and there's a coda from about 3 minutes and 30 seconds where the cello plays a climbing pattern, finishing on an ambiguous, unresolved note. Track 7, Prelude in E minor. This is originally for solo piano, written in 1942, and it was arranged for cello and piano in 1965. The original was the 9th of Eller's 10 lyric pieces for piano, written after Eller's Jewish wife, Anna, was arrested by the Nazis in Tallinn in July 1942. Anna Eller vanished without a trace, and 20 years later, Eller received proof that she had been killed in a concentration camp in November 1942. This is a brief 2-minute work with a touching melody. Let's hear it. The piano harmony has a bit of dissonant color to it, and the cello melody stays somber without getting overly dramatic, and settles on a satisfying low note at the end. Track 8 is Eller's Ballade in E minor from 1944, the longest of Eller's cello works. This and a version for cello and orchestra were prepared in parallel. The work was finished at the end of 1944, the first months of Soviet occupation of Estonia. It begins with an adagio section. The cello begins the piece with a deep-toned emotional melody, and this great singing tone in the low end here from Valle-Rasmus Roots. Let's hear the opening of this work. This is followed by an Allegro Giusto march section, which is optimistic. Let's hear a little bit of that. At 2 minutes and 36 seconds, there's a lyrical theme that balances the upbeat march mood. The march returns, and the work culminates in an enlarged and majestic treatment of the initial adagio. There's a solo cadenza at 5 minutes and 55 seconds, which is brief. It soars dramatically, then there's a long and elaborate coda that fades into a dreamlike meandering of lyric passages. The dreamlike quality of the ending is surprising and makes an impression after all the drama of the piece up to this point. This piece made the biggest impression on me of all of Eller's cello works, so I would sample this one if you're only going to hear one, this track 8, Ballade in E minor. And that's all of Eller's cello works. Now we're going to get to some of the other Estonian composers on this album, whose names I can't pronounce either. Okay, tracks 9 through 11, Eduard Oja? I don't know how to say his name. He lived 1905 to 1950, dying at 45, I guess. Trilogy of Time for cello and piano from 1934. He was Eller's student, and he was lauded as one of the brighter and more original talents of the 1930s, but his alternation of wild enthusiasm and deep depression made his unstable mental condition evident from the start, and it only got worse during World War II. This is a 3-movement work. The first movement is called Leif, and it starts with a repeating chord in the piano. The cello comes in with a fragmented melody, then swirls down to its low end. So let's hear the character of Oja's music. Well, that got dramatic quick, and there's only 1 minute and 30 seconds left to the movement, so he squeezes a lot of ideas in there. The timbres in the work are interesting. The piano's bass is low down in the instrument, and the cello plays with passion and commitment, and the movement ends inconclusively. We move to track 10, the second movement, Eternity. The repeating note in the right hand is a metaphor for the stillness of inevitability, or perhaps it's an eternal clock. These repeating figures seem to be a feature of Estonian piano music. They occurred often in Eller's works too. Let's hear that sound. By the way, as I'm sitting back to listen to this, I noticed that, annoyingly, Deezer, again, doesn't have the composer's names next to the works, so you don't know who composed the work that you're listening to. Come on, Deezer. Anyway, track 11, the third movement, The Present Day. This is described as a buffoonish vision of burlesque that frantically insists on merriment. One guesses that Oja was not impressed by the time he lived in. The shortest of the 3 movements, this actually sounds cheerful by today's standards. I guess it's because we live in an empty world, so this empty music sounds pretty good to us. Anyway, I don't think it's long enough to insist on merriment, though, but it does manage to be repetitive in such a short time. Track 12, Willem Reimann, Lullaby, This is written circa 1930. Riemann lived 1906 to 1992. This starts softly and gently, as we would expect from a lullaby. These types of pieces generally draw out the melodic gifts of the composer, and this piece certainly does that, so let's hear the beginning. Well, the cello really does kind of stick to the same note and let the piano sort of do a lot of the harmonic work underneath. I'm kind of wondering what kind of dreams this baby's going to have, because this sounds kind of heavy for a lullaby. The work breaks into a livelier section after this opening melody, but then goes back to it toward the end with a more funereal tolling piano accompaniment in the second minute, and the piece ends calmly. Track 13, Hermann Kend. That's K-A with an umlaut, N-D. He lived 1905 to 1952, another one who died young. His Poème d'amour from 1933. Kend is unknown even to Estonians today, yet he was the first and so far only composer to have written an opera on the Estonian national epic, the Kievipoeg, in 1936. Kend escaped the Soviet occupation in 1944 and died at age 46 in Fitchburg, Massachusetts in the USA in 1952. This is a very romantic work, melodic with an arpeggiated piano accompaniment. It has an attractive melody, it's pretty straightforward, and it's a salon piece, pretty brief at just under 2 minutes. And let's hear a sample. Track 14, Hermann Kend again, his Ballade. It's a more substantial piece, and it's still in a romantic vein, but the piano has more of an active role in the musical dialogue. Let's hear the way it opens. The piano picks up some of the cello's lines and sometimes anticipates them. The cello sings out into its high end at points and really uses the entire cello range for its melody. At 1 minute and 58 seconds, the playing becomes bolder and more impassioned, the harmony filled out more. The music makes an arch dynamically, ending with the same quiet theme it began with. At the end, the piano has the melody for most of the way, with the cello adding appealing comments. The cello finishes off the work with a melody that reaches up into the high range. And finally, track 15, the final work on the album, Eduard Toobin, 1905 to 1982, the first movement of his cello concerto from 1955. He left it unfinished. This is the only movement that was finished. So it's marked recitativo, and Toobin was an Eller student. Toobin immigrated to Sweden in 1944 to escape the Soviet occupation. The cello concerto is left unfinished with only the piano score of the first movement extant. The cello makes some recitativo statements after the introductory chords, and then the main section begins at 1 minute and 18 seconds and builds to a compassione at 2 minutes and 28 seconds. So there are some surprisingly modernistic chords that this piece begins with. The cello comes in dramatically, as you would expect in a concerto. It's an opening statement that stands out on this album of smaller, more romantic-sounding works. So let's hear that. And you'll notice the recitativo character of the cello's playing, right? And a recitativo is in an opera when the character speaks instead of singing, or kind of sing-speaks. And that's what the cello is doing here at the beginning. There's a pretty exciting build-up in tension and dynamic at about the 2 minute and 25 second mark to a new section with some harsh but highly intriguing harmonies. By 3 minutes and 45 seconds, the music settles down, and the cello plays a legato melody over simpler piano accompaniment. By 4 minutes and 40 seconds, the piano accompaniment becomes spare, and the cello climbs via some emphatic patterns that caught my ear. There's a lot to enjoy in this work. The cello gets a pretty dramatic solo part that ends with a dramatic double-stopped chord at around the 7 minute and 58 second mark. In fact, the cello has some highly dramatic and technically challenging material toward the end. Roots brings the piece to a close with an excellent quick decrescendo from forte to pianissimo. I wish Toobin had finished this work because I'm pretty captivated by it. And you should sample this. It's I think it's about 15 minutes long, but well worth it. There's a lot of material and it's all interesting. So it seems that the 20th century saw Estonia in a romantic idiom musically. The works on this album are all accomplished, with perhaps the 8 Eller compositions and especially his ballade drawing the most interest, as well as the Toobin movement at the end. The playing of Valle-Rasmus roots and Sten Lassmann is highly committed. This is clearly music they love. The Toobin Concerto movement was a great album closer. It stood out for me for its comparatively advanced harmony and the creative uses that harmony was put to. The music on this album presents an interesting and really beautiful portrait of the cello and piano music heard in Estonia in the 20th century.
First of all of these Estonian composers have a real gift for beautiful melodies.
Yeah, right?
I wasn't expecting something this pretty with 20th century music in mind. Eller especially has wonderful melodies and a real romantic heart that comes through all of these pieces. I really enjoyed it, and Roots' playing and shaping of the melodies really enjoyable. But the other composers here are much in the same vein with these wonderful melodies and a real romantic nature. Even the final Toobin I found after that shocking different harmony at the beginning has kind of a romantic sentiment in the cello lines. So I would recommend this to all fans of cello. And this was really, really enjoyable, wonderfully played, and makes you want to hear some more of this kind of music from Estonia.
Yeah, really beautiful. Moving into the contemporary classical category, although I'm not really sure I could call this a classical album.
What is it? We don't know.
Yeah, we don't know what this is, but it has compositional qualities to it, so we'll call it classical. The compositions are by Marius Neset. Now, you might be wondering who he is. He's a jazz saxophonist from Norway, and he's known as the English say, saxophonist.
Right.
Anyway, this is an album he made with Leif Ove Andsnes, and it's called Who We Are. Andsnes, of course, the Norwegian pianist, the classical Norwegian pianist. And it also includes Louisa Tuck on cello and Ingrid Neset on the flute. She's Marius's sister. This is on the Simax label, and I sort of want to tell you a little bit more about these compositions, what they're about, how much of them are composed, and how much are sort of improvised. But I reached out to Simax Records and to the artists on their Bandcamp page, and nobody wrote back to me, so I'm really just going to have to wing it on this one. There was some stuff online, like promotional material, but you can't really glean too much from that. That's what they want you to think about the album. And I'm going to tell you what I thought, so this will be something new anyway. The theme of the album is really chamber music. These are compositions, so I think of them as classical in their big form, though they do have other elements in them. So just because they have like this kind of architectural form, to me that makes them classical. Or they wind up with an architectural form. Anyway, the first 4 tracks are called Who We Are, parts 1 through 4. Let's go through them individually. Track 1, Who We Are, part 1, beginning. This starts gently on a piano with a slow arpeggiated chord with a little hiccup in it at the end. The sax comes in gently too. This is an airy, comforting sound. Both musicians have beautiful tone here. And this is something also that we think of in classical music, just a beautiful tone. You cultivate that. In the first minute, you can hear both Ingrid Neset on flute and Louisa Tuck on cello. And I'm going to move in a bit and sample that so we can hear all 4 musicians. Right now, in sampling this in the middle, I'm sort of doing this work in an injustice because it really builds up from a very quiet, beautiful sound. And I think the appeal of the track is in the way it builds up to what you just heard. So I'm going to encourage you to go and sample the entire track. The piece ends with some inquiring cello lines and is inconclusive, and we move to track 2, Who We Are, part 2, Legacy. This starts with solo piano. The flute comes in afterwards, playing a melody over the piano line, which breaks up and stops, and then cascades downward. We hear a lightly bowed cello, playing a harmonic, I think, and then the soprano sax is in, but the line concludes with the flute. My ears seem to be playing tricks on me here, and I think this is part of the composition that Marius Neset did. At 2 minutes and 30 seconds, the piano plays as the flute or soprano sax, I can't tell which, but it sounds more like a reed-produced sound. It wavers on 2 pitches. The flute and sax trade parts mid-line on occasion, unnoticeably changing one to the other. It's certainly surprising to the ear. Let me just sample a bit of this, and I'm going to do this again towards the end. This is at the 3 minute and 30 second mark. Actually, it's more like the middle. But again, I'm doing this a little disservice by starting in the middle, but you'll get an idea of what I'm talking about here. It's a pretty exciting, wild movement. The opening gentle feel is back at the end, though, and the track ends solidly with quietly played piano chords. Track 3, Who We Are, Part 3, Uncertainty. The cello starts this track with a solo. The piano eventually comes in to accompany with light falling patterns from the high end. This is like a classical chamber piece for cello and piano up to the 3rd minute when the flute comes in with the melody, and the cello and piano both provide accompaniment. Tenor sax eventually makes its entry, and we have a whole ensemble by the 4th minute. Let's hear this sampled from the 5th minute, so pretty deep into the piece. So we heard a bit of a jazzy tone from Neset there, but it just sort of disappears too. He's really a bit of a chameleon, the way he can just change from like one sort of feel to the next within the same line in his phrase. The composition changes quite a bit from the outset, and I like the way Andsnes is given so many different sections to play in. Track 4, Who We Are, Part 4, Evolution. A chirping flute begins this section, playing solo. The sax eventually comes in and starts playing along. It's a tenor this time, just like in the previous track. The lines don't match up at first, but eventually align in a magical sonic moment. I'm going to try to catch that about 1 minute into the track. It's really cool when you get the spontaneous rhythmic changes in the phrase and you have two instruments doing it at the same time. It's one of the cool things that you can do in a composed piece. The piano, as we heard, is playing along to this jumpy figure, and this persists up to the 3rd minute, and the kaleidoscopic combinations of timbres keep it interesting. When we get to around 3 minutes and 30 seconds, we hear a high cello note lightly bowed so that it lightly screeches, and the piano comes back with its first part opening arpeggio figure. And that's how the track ends. Track 5, Waterfall Jig. It's a pretty cool title. Tenor sax starts this with a winding, jazz-sounding figure. The cello then starts a quarter note ticking rhythm on a single staccato note lightly brushed out of the cello. At 1 minute and 1 second there's a pause, then the solo cello begins a new section, this time with the sax playing the repeating staccato note. The piece does acquire a non-stop jig feel by the 3rd minute. Then the sax steps out with jazzy figures. The merging of one element to another is again intriguing, and I'm going to play the end of this piece. Let's hear how it ends. I hope you were listening to the cello there, too, because it had some pretty cool lines. Track 6, Introduction to Prague's Ballet. The piano starts this out sounding like a 20th century post-war piano piece, but once his intro is over, he and the cello move into a romantic legato melody, almost like moving back in time, with the piano commenting at the end of phrases. It's a lovely melody, very traditional sounding, and the cello's tone makes it sing beautifully. So what I thought with the intro, it kind of sounded like something more on the atonal side at first and sort of telling us about the modern world, and then when the more romantic music came in, we sort of moved back. It's almost like a memory of something past. That was the impression I got. Track 7, Prague's Ballet. This is the actual main piece. The previous track resolves into this one, but we don't hear the resolving chord, only a pizzicato cello that begins the track. The soprano sax eventually comes in, playing a melody over the continuing cello line. Piano comes in with some splashes and comments in the 1st minute, and I'm going to move ahead to the 2nd minute to sample this. And here the cello starts getting a kind of sexier tone to it, and you'll want to hear that. So track 7, Prague's Ballet, sample that. There's some jazzy inflections in that line. And he ends this solo with an arching glissando line, and then the opening melody repeats. The ending, and other sections as well, have a tango feel to them in the sax's phrasing at times as well. Track 8, Road to Polaris, Part 1. And there's no Part 2 to this, so I'm kind of wondering what this is about. The flute starts with a quiet but sharply breathed repeating note. Eventually we start hearing the whisper of the breath, and a more excitable rhythm emerges in the flute. At 1 minute and 50 seconds, a more melodic and traditional flute line emerges, accompanying itself virtuosically with repeating, alternating lower notes. The sax eventually comes in with the same pattern the flute is playing, and they play together. Now I'm going to sample way out into the 4-minute mark here. I love the sound of single-note instruments, like 2 single-note instruments playing a duet. It's always really interesting, that line against line. And I'm sampling the end of these pieces a lot because they all build up to the main idea of the piece, and I think that's the best example of what the piece is about. But these are all worth hearing all the way through because they do build from something. They're kind of cumulative, and I can't really catch that quality in the samples. Anyway, tracks 9 through 11 are a chaconne, part 1, 2, and 3. This is the last sort of big composition on the album. So track 9, chaconne part 1, starts with solo piano, which sounds atonal or chromatic. It's the bass line for the chaconne. Piano chords are heard below eventually. The piano line builds to an ending that doesn't resolve, but the soprano sax comes in with a breathy split tone that leads to the next track. Track 10, chaconne part 2. The tenor sax is now a full part of the composition, playing a melody as the piano plays rolling patterns underneath. I feel like I can't sample these 2 movements because of the way they build. It's just sort of you'd be in the middle of something and you wouldn't really get it. The sax line shows some jazz inflections in track 10, that's chaconne part 2, and it goes in and out of them. It's almost like you hear them. It's like, oh, that's jazz, and then it's just gone. And you think, did I just hear that? The track ends with a resolved arpeggio in the piano. And then track 11, chaconne part 3, the sax starts a percussive pattern made by quick breaths on the reed, I guess. The piano plays isolated notes in the high end, and the space slowly gets filled in by both sax and piano. The piano stops at about 1 minute and 30 seconds, then builds up again. I want to catch a few of these qualities in this sample, hopefully. This is from 1 minute and 30 seconds into track 11. There's a lot of this kind of spiky sort of staccato playing from the piano on these compositions. This piece sounds sort of minimalist with a lot of repeating notes and patterns, but the sax arrives at full, though staccato tone in the 3rd minute. The sax goes on a notey run in the third minute, arriving on a rapidly repeating note to end the piece with the piano's repeating chord. So this is a great sounding recording with all four musicians producing exquisite tone. The compositions themselves are sonically interesting, with sections in which themes or figures are passed from one instrument to another without the handoff being perceptible. And that's really pleasing to the ear. It's almost like a magic trick when you're listening to it on a recording. It has an overall classical feel, but Marius Neset on sax brings some jazz elements to the compositions at times, particularly noticeable when he's playing solo. Neset is the composer here, and he gives a lot of the material to his partners, making his saxophone one of an equal partnership, though the ending chaconne is all him and Andsnes. All of the pieces seem to build up to the full ensemble from a solo opening. The album maintains interest throughout, and is fairly easy on the ears, bringing some interesting timbres into the mix. It's an enjoyable project, one that listeners can really sink into. I enjoyed hearing it.
Stylistically, it's hard to pin down, but that doesn't matter because it's enjoyable. And there's a lot of variety, which is what held my attention. The instrumentation is really appealing, and each instrument gets moments to shine through. Particularly, I was wondering what role the cello is going to play, and that was really interesting. There are sweet melody themes and then interesting pizzicato bass lines. I also liked the flute in combination with the two different saxes, and his whole sax approach, as you mentioned, goes in between more classical type of things and then full-on jazzy, especially towards the end. And so you get a real tour through a lot of musical styles, different moods, from light and entertaining to a little bit more serious. There's lyrical parts, and it's an interesting tour through this whole recording. Interesting concept, a little bit adventurous, but that's what we like.
Yeah, this is a bit of an unusual classical meets jazz thing, which is what we're all about here at the Adult Music Podcast. It's adult music. That's what they should call it.
Right. A new genre category.
We'll send them a t-shirt.
To the jazz half of the program, and Mike, we're going to go Greek.
Oh, I love it when we go Greek.
We've gone Greek a lot before in our jazz segment, starting out, I think, with Iakavos Simonitis, the Jaco Organ Trio, and we also interviewed Iakavos. We also have discussed music from one of our favorite piano trios, the Spiral Trio, the father of them all, George Kontraforis, Konstantinos Storitis with his nice organ group, pianist Paris Gagastathis, and guitarist Apostolos Levantopoulos.
Boy, it's hard to believe we did all that. I can't.
Yeah. Lots of Greek jazz. So I always have my eye out for new recordings, and we've got another one to start out the program this evening. Ntinos Manos, bassist, with his recording Northwind. It's on Puzzlemusik, and it came out September 13th. Ntinos Manos has been on the Greek jazz scene for more than a decade. He was a member of the well-known group there, Next Step, and he's participated in various festivals in Greece and abroad, such as the London Jazz Festival, Brosella Folk and Jazz Festival, Odessa Jazz Festival, Athens Technopolis Jazz Festival as well. He's collaborated with a lot of the big names in the Greek jazz scene and with international artists including Sheila Jordan and one of our favorite pianists, David Kukarski. Since 2017, he has been an associate professor at the Department of Music Studies of the Ionian University, and since 2020, he's been based in Thessaloniki, where he works as a member of the state orchestra there. On this recording, Ntinos Manos on bass, also all original compositions, and he's done the arrangements as well. James Wiley on tenor saxophone. Doesn't sound very Greek to me.
I know, right?
He's actually a New Zealander now based there in Thessaloniki. Theodoros Kotsifis on guitar, Leandros Pasias on piano, Georgos Klontsos Chrysidis on drums. Production on the recording done by Manos himself. The recording done by Thanos Kazantzis at Studio Polytropon, Thessaloniki. Mixing by Harris Karatzis. Mastering Yannis Christodoulatos at Sweet Spot, Athens. The recording is going to get started with the title track. It's actually a kind of introduction here. Eerie sounds of bass bowing, guitar effects, piano, and some sax sounds enter in. But don't worry, I haven't picked an amorphous or avant-garde recording to get things started. Piano ripples and guitar figures gel a bit more towards the end. I assume it all represents the wind and serves as an atmospheric opener. Let's hear towards the ending, the last minute or so, when it comes together a bit more. That gets us going to track 2, the beginning. And Manos gets the tune going with a loping bass ostinato, which gets doubled by guitar with piano chords and a light cymbal beat. Wiley comes in for the melody, and Kotzefis doubles the legato lines on guitar. Let's hear the beginning of the beginning. It's a longish, evolving minor melody of more than 40 measures, and Kotzefis continues on for the first solo with a warm tone. Wiley follows with a smooth solo. Let's hear some of his sax playing on this tune. After the sax solo, they get back to another run through the melody that works to a quietening, vamping ending over the ostinato. Track 3, Medusa. There's a 16-measure intro with building piano chords that have some unexpected harmonic tension with guitar fills above. Guitar and sax together, again, take the appropriately snaky melody lines. The structure is interesting with 2 8-measure sections, then a 6-measure, and then 7-measure section before an 8-measure guitar interlude. Let's take a listen to this one. The melody section repeats after that guitar interlude, and while he's up for the first solo, things switch between a swing feel over walking bass and more snappy interval bass figures. Wiley has really relaxed phrasing here. Then Kotzefis follows with a guitar solo. Let's take a listen to his solo from midway to his conclusion. Clonsos Chrysitis has some drum fills back into a return of the melody. It comes to what seems to be the ending, but continues on with slow tremolo guitar chords, piano bass, and cymbal fills. Maybe it represents the end of Medusa, but the final chords seem to turn brighter. Track 4 is Dream Suite, a suite in one tune that has a lot of transformations. The first minute is a slow section of guitar melody line that the bass and piano move in sync with, marking out a rather forlorn mood. Manos changes all that with a repeating bass note that gets a faster tempo going into a swinging unison sax and guitar melody over walking bass. That comes to a fermata with sax swirls, and I want to sample the next section that starts with what sounds like simultaneous plucked and bowed bass. I don't know if you can actually do that all together or if it's another track, but it brings in a driving rock beat from Clonsos Chrysitis and some angsty sax from Wiley. That continues on to a sudden stop, and then Kotzefis carries it with a new 3-beat guitar theme and uplifting melody lines to the end. There are a lot of changes, kind of like a sequence of dreams. Track 5 is Patience. Rhythmic alternating piano chords and some bass harmonics get this one going into a piano melody over a light beat. Let's hear the beginning. Sounds like a 30-measure melody overall, and Kotzefis takes over there with a repeat of the theme, and he gets joined by Wiley on the lines from midway. And next, it's time for a bass solo from Manos, and it turns out it's the only one on the album, so we're going to check it out. He has a huge and ringing tone. That bass sing, reaching up high. Passius gets a gentle piano solo on this one too. After an 8-measure interlude that's like the introduction, Kotzefis and Wiley are back with the melody that has a little dreamy ending section with soft sax lines. Track 6, The Lost Eagle. This starts off with a cool rhythmic double-stopped bass idea joined by guitar power chords and drum fills. The melody has unison guitar and sax lines over a rocky beat. Section there, guitar and sax trade phrases. There's a transition to the same melody again, but this time to a swing beat over walking bass. Kotzefis solos first with an echoey reverb that matches well, and Wiley gets a solo too. Let's hear some of him a little bit later in the tune. Digging down low and then building up some tension there. They get back to the swinging melody, this time with Passius adding improvised piano ideas on top. It ends up with a vamp over the opening ideas with some hot simultaneous sax and guitar improvisation. Track 7, Bass to Basics. This tune has a dreamy atmosphere. It's in 3/4 time and begins with a 12-note repeating bass pattern. That gets joined by guitar before guitar and sax take a soft 32-measure melody. There are some neat snaking lines that navigate unexpected harmonies. There's an 8-measure guitar interlude, and then the melody repeats. Kotzefis gets an extended solo that's spacious and atmospheric. Let's hear that get going. After the guitar solo, things get quiet for Wiley's solo with a synced-up rhythmic backing that builds up to a final time through the guitar and sax melody. Track 8, Big Mushroom Intro. It's a soft 3/4 rhythmic piano that gets a lonesome guitar melody and Manos' bowed bass lines. Let's hear a little of that. From there, the theme repeats with Wiley joining in softly. It's a short piece at less than 2 minutes, connecting directly to the Big Mushroom, track 9. Here it changes up to a 4/4 meter with nice drumming subdivisions from Clonsos Chrysidis. After a 4-measure piano intro, we get a sax and guitar melody. This is pretty cool. It's basically an altered blues progression stretched to 20 measures. Kotzefis and Wiley both get expressive solos, and they switch things up to swing for Wiley, which I wasn't expecting. Let's hear a bit of both solos so that you can hear that change. And the tune finishes up with once more Around the Melody and some final guitar and sax ideas on the hold. And the recording ends up with track 10, Trees. A delicate, minute-long solo piano opening gets this tune going. Everyone comes in time, with Wylie taking the ballad melody with a pleasing tone. Let's have a sample from where the main sax melody comes in. It's a 40-measure melody, with the final 8-measure section being the same as the first. Pacius gets a piano solo with a soft touch and nice sense of space, so let's hear some of his playing on this tune. Wylie returns for the last 16 measures of the melody, and the ending is a solo piano section mirroring the opening section for the final minute or so that ends over a bowed bass note. Overall, it's a mellow album that fits together conceptually very well. Our leader Manos gives most of the solo spotlight to his sidemen, with Kotsifis and Wylie getting imaginative improvisations over a variety of rhythmic and harmonic settings. Pacius gets 2 tasteful solos, like the one we just sampled. Klauntsos Chrysidis' drumming catches your ear with great cymbal tones captured clearly on the recording, and Manos' 1 bass solo shows a rich tone and melodic sense. We get a well-rounded picture of Manos as a composer here, and his tunes are engaging. The melodies draw you in with the dual sax and guitar lines, and there are interesting modal harmonies and twists, as well as creative structural ideas to keep you engaged. The many moods of Dream Suite were interesting, and Medusa and Big Mushroom were standout tunes for me.
You know, we might want to think of moving the Mountain Lair to Greece, because Greek jazz continues to impress. This album's rather straightforward, with a more traditional approach to the forms it employs. It was the melodic playing and the sensitivity of the solos that caught my ear. When Manos stepped out for a solo on Patience, I found his melodic approach to be sensitive and appealing, and I especially liked the overall positive vibe on The Lost Eagle. I was a bit surprised that we didn't hear much of pianist Leandros Pacias soloing on this album, but after his solo on the final track, Trees, which had a lot of soul in the phrasing on this slow-tempo tune, I wanted to hear more of him.
Yeah.
Guitarist Theodoros Kotsifas and saxophonist James Wylie get most of the solos and carry them well. The playing is all highly musical, and the sense of well-shaped phrases and sensitively played melodies, even during solos. And I think this is an album waiting to be discovered and enjoyed.
Yeah, remember, you heard it here first on Adult Music. There wasn't anything in English about this. I had to translate the information from Greek, so...
Yeah.
Greek jazz, we like it. Remember us, guys, when we retire and want to go to our new lair in the Mediterranean, hope you'll be waiting for us.
I could eat Greek food every day. No problem.
Okay, well, I'm always trying to get new artists to discover, but it's also fun now that we've been doing this for 3 years to go back and hear what people we've already listened to are doing on their next venture. And that's the case with our next recording, vibraphonist Simon Moullier.
Yeah, now these are artists that we discovered ourselves, and we just want to see where they're going, I really like hearing them too.
And this is his new recording, Elements of Light, on Candid Records. It came out September 20th. Simon Moullier is a French vibraphonist after being mentored by Quincy Jones, Herbie Hancock, Wayne Shorter, and Jimmy Heath at the Thelonious Monk Institute, and then Darren Barrett at Berklee College of Music. He's worked with artists like Gerald Clayton, Ben Wendell, Terry Lynn Carrington, Buster Williams, and he's been on a lot of recordings with artists like Mark Turner, Kendrick Scott, Miguel Zenón. His debut as a leader was Spirit Song that came out in 2020. We started the podcast in 2021, and we've followed him since then. Starting with episode 29, Europa, we heard his recording Countdown on Fresh Sound New Talent, the title track being the famous John Coltrane composition, and the rest of the program had Monk and other jazz standards on it, the same drummer on this recording as that one. And we were really impressed with his overwhelming energy on that first recording we heard from him. He followed that with Isla in February of 2023 as a self-release. We didn't check that one out, but in episode 140, Beyond Infinite, we heard Inception on Fresh Sound Records. That came out in October of 2023. That was a trio, again with the same drummer, and mostly post-bop compositions by Horace Silver, McCoy Tyner, Mingus, Miles Davis. There was a Hobeam tune on there as well, and he had one original tune based on rhythm changes, and I remember that we were impressed with his melodic lines. They're really horn-like in his solos. The notes say about this recording, throughout Elements of Light, vibraphonist composer Simon Moullier reconciles his love for mid-century acoustic jazz with inspired production choices from pop and alternative rock, blending vibraphone and piano melodies with synthesizers. Here on his fifth album, he emphasizes the concept of unfolding. Elements of Light isn't crossover jazz or jazz adjacent. Rather, it is a personal and original expression of a tradition Moullier inherited from his musical heroes. Well, it is quite different than what we've heard before.
I agree.
Simon Moullier here, as always, on vibraphone, all original compositions on this one. Lex Corton on piano, Rick Rosato on bass, and Jungkook Kim on drums. We've got two special guests, Gerald Clayton on piano on a track, and Marquis Hill on trumpet. The recording is going to start out with 808. It's a rhythmic and synthy opener. Check out the muted synthy starting notes into a 16-measure intro. The melody is kind of dreamy and has surprising harmonic lifts as it moves along. Let's take a listen. Works into a riffy rhythmic section, leading to an acoustic piano solo from Corton. Let's check out Moulier's vibraphone solo on this one that contrasts with that melody section being more straight-toned and having a lack of sustain. Back to the more synthy sounding melody from there, and it works to an interesting faded ending. Track 2 is Pyramid of the Sun, and the note say it integrates elements of progressive rock and blues. This has more of an R&B groove that digs in as it goes on. After a 16-measure intro, the melody is long, ringing with sustained vibes and a synthy ambiance. Heads to a bluesy vamping section after 2 minutes or so, and let's check out the start of Corton's piano solo on this tune. Rather than snapping into that cool groove, I like how his lines are more free-flowing in phrasing. Moulier's solo on this one has more free-flying mallets with bluesy touches in his lines, joining up for some final vamping and an ending sequence of new chords that lift it up and then let it down in an unexpected way. Track 3 is Bird of Paradise. This one is full of rhythmic change-ups, starting out with a tricky, snappy opening section that switches up to a more relaxed 3-beat feel. Changes ahead before the opening pattern idea returns to launch Moullier into a solo. Let's hear some of his improvisations on this one. undulating effect there, like a roller coaster in the lines. From there, it works through the melody sections that we heard previously and ends with the tricky opening section, just piano and vibes remaining on the final repeat of it. Track 4, Primavera. The notes say this acknowledges Debussy, Stravinsky, and Ravel in its intro, and the ballad writing of McCoy Tyner and Joe Henderson as it unfurls. It's got a rubato ringing start with cymbal and tom fills. The harmonic changes are interesting, and you may sense the mentioned impressionistic and modern classical harmony influence. I'll let it play until the slow ballad tempo starts. And the melody is sparse but lush with harmonies, and Moullier has space to add tasty filling ideas. On this tune, Rosato gets a bass solo, so let's hear a little of his playing. Back, sticking close to the melodic lines but with more adornment and some nice interaction with Corton making for the ending. Track 5, the title track, Elements of Light. This one stands out for the busy subdivided beat and synth bass. The piano and vibes melody lines are contrastingly placid, and the highlight here is the exchanging of improvised sections from Moullier and Clayton, who's the guest on this tune. So I'll sample it from the start of that section, about 1 minute and 45 seconds into the tune. Bass and drums drop out for a short section for a little surprise before they play through the melody sections again to a thinning ending. Track 6 is Jiwa, and the notes say it's an homage to Moulier's favorite Brazilian composers, It's got a clicky, relaxed Brazilian beat. There's an 8-measure intro of chords, and then an evolving 32-measure melody. Play around the melody twice and then bring back the intro section into Moulier's improvised solo. Let's hear some of that into the start of Corten's solo. Track 7 is Olympus, and it's off to the races with this number that starts with an impossibly fast vibes and piano lick into mostly a ringing chordal outline over the form of the tune for about a minute. I'll sample from the repeat of that lick into Corten's exciting piano solo about a minute into the tune. Follows from there. This is definitely the double espresso tune of the recording. Fine drumming from Kim on this one, and they mix things up rhythmically under Moulier's improvisations without letting up on the relentless pace. Listen for the muted glissandos at the end, which I remember from his previous recordings. Track 8 is Lotus, and the notes say this is a nod to the short piano compositions of Mumpo. This has lyrical, flowing melody lines taken together by Marquis Hill's trumpet and Moullier. Lots of rippling vibes and piano decoration as well. The drums started out, and Kim provides a lot of cymbal fills. There are birdie background sounds at the start as well. Let's hear the beginning. pretty, and it's mostly a through composed number, but Hill gets to open up a bit on the end where he's got some harmony from himself on multiple tracks underneath. So let's hear the ending of the tune as well. And the recording ends up with track 9, Oriental Folk Song. This has a pentatonic melody idea that lends itself to a minor blues infusion. There's an 8-measure vamping section and then a repeating self-contained 8-measure progression that goes around twice. Let's hear it from that opening section the second time into some of Moulier's improvisations a little bit into the tune. Up on his vocalizing in the background as well. Corton gets an exciting solo too on this tune. They bring back the opening section and Moullier gets to improvise over that to a slowed and quietening ending. The last two recordings we heard of Moullier focused on post-bop compositions of jazz greats and some standards. Here we get all original compositions in a different atmosphere. There are more synthy elements, especially in the first half of the recording. Moullier is stretching out with a variety of harmonic influences in his writing, and that keeps things engaging with unexpected harmonies over the course of his extended melody sections. His improvised style is still quite familiar, with solos that often take a more muted marimba-like approach where you can hear each note clearly, and his lines have a horn-like fluidity to them. There's a variety of rhythmic feels with straight beats, R&B, the blazing Olympus, and the lovely rubato Lotus. As before, Moullier is always energetic and exciting.
Yeah, this album relies heavily on grooves and ostinato to set its moods, and often the band will vamp on the groove and it'll take a while for a solo to emerge. So to me, like, the tracks were more like jazzy than they were jazz, although there are solos in all of them. The album's on the hypnotic side, I thought, very different from what we've heard from Moullier so far. The band ride the grooves for long periods of time, there's a lot of vamping, and the material sets various moods and sustains them through the track. The most extended solos by both Moullier and then Lex Corton on piano are in the last track, Oriental Folk Song. So the album's a pleasant listen, highly produced, with a glossy sound, and I liked it. But to be honest, I preferred Moulier's two previous outings, which were more traditional in their approach and had him like playing some really virtuosic vibes. Here he's more musical, which is also good to hear. But if you want to hear new approaches, this album has them, and it was fun for that. There were some really great build-ups, like, for example, Pyramid of the Sun. I liked the whole kind of timbre of the opening, you know, the way the whole thing sounded. So it was good, but not kind of what I'm kind of like most about him, let's say.
I guess he's trying to expand his tonal palette.
Yeah, no problem with that.
And it's interesting then that when he does play his solos, they're very much non-ringing. And there's a real contrast there. It's interesting,
Yeah, they always are like that, yeah.
And our final recording for this episode is the David Weiss Sextet, trumpeter David Weiss, Auteur, on the Origin label that came out September 20th. David Weiss was born in Queens, New York, and he started out playing piano and then trumpet, playing in rock and progressive rock bands while he was in art school. He turned his focus more to trumpet and jazz, transferring to North Texas State. He played in salsa and Haitian music bands and worked with Ray Charles for a brief time. In 1996, he formed the New Jazz Composers Octet, and in 2001, Freddie Hubbard recorded with them on the album New Colors. That was on Hip Bop Records. And the Octet released their second CD, Walkin' the Line, on Fresh Sound Records in 2003. That was around the time I first became aware of him, and I saw the Octet with Freddie Hubbard in Osaka. Oh. It was a Tuesday night, and the crowd was kind of thin, and so they asked me if I wanted to stay for the second set. And of course I said yes. And in the break, I got to meet Freddie Hubbard and talk with him for a while, which was great because he was like my trumpet hero when I was a youngster. I also got to speak with David Weiss and Xavier Davis and also Myron Walden, who's on this album as well. And also in the octet, who was in there, Steve Davis, who we heard a couple weeks ago. Lots of big names, all good jazz composers. And so that was an interesting night for me. Weiss also played with the Cookers, and he's had a sextet group that recorded several albums, Breathing Room and The Mirror, and later, When Words Fail, and also the group David Weiss and Point of Departure. They had 2 live albums that are excellent, Snuck In and Snuck Out. And with him on this recording is Myron Walden, who I just mentioned. He's a sax player I've been really excited about since I first heard him. Great tone and searing solos. I picked out his sound right away when I was listening to Tom Harrell's Wise Children when it came out as well. And I enjoyed seeing him with the New Jazz Composers Octet. I have a lot of his releases as a leader. I think I shared some of them with you years ago, Mike, but I haven't heard anything from him in a while. So I was excited to see him on this album as well.
And this was quite a performance, really. Yeah. I'll have something to say about it at the end, especially.
So the lineup is David Weiss on trumpet, Myron Walden alto sax, Nicole Glover on tenor sax. She's everywhere these days.
Yeah, right.
And we heard her latest album, Plays, back in episode 160, New Perspectives. That was back in April. We've got David Bryant on piano, Eric Wheeler on bass, and E.J. Strickland on drums, who's played with Weiss going back a ways to the earlier groups with Walden. This was recorded January 23rd and 24th, 2023 at Big Orange Sheep, Brooklyn, New York. Recording engineer Chris Benham and assistant Kat Evers. Additional recording and editing, David Turk, mixed by Catherine Miller, mastered by Fred Kevorkian at Kevorkian Mastering, Brooklyn, New York. The recording is going to start out with a Weiss original, Too Little, Too Late. Make sure you're paying attention because you might miss something as this tricky 36-measure melody goes along. The first 2 sections have horn figures that rise over the changing harmonies. Things get syncopated in the rhythm section underneath, and then it builds to a climax. And Walden is right out of the gate with one of his high-energy solos. His tone is really distinctive. Let's hear this recording get started. Exciting stuff there. And Weiss follows with the next solo, so let's jump back in to hear some of his playing on this tune. That's a tricky harmonic landscape there, but his lines are well connected, and he keeps the continuity of ideas. A little nod to Freddie Hubbard with those last licks in there as well. And Glover, we heard getting going from there, working into some angsty cries up high in her solo, and then lines that dig down low. Bryant is next on piano, and he has a fun bounce in his lines with interesting ideas in both hands. And the melody is back to wrap it up. This is the shortest tune on the recording. Track 2 is Resilience for George. That's pianist George Cables, who has overcome some health challenges. He's a great classy player. We always like to listen to his recordings all the way back to the ones he made with Art Pepper, as he was Art Pepper's accompanist of choice. It's a straight beat tune. The intro has a cool syncopated bass and left-hand piano figure that catches your ear, and Weiss has the pickup line into the melody that has nicely harmonized sax lines. When it gets into the second section, the meter changes up with some measures of 3 beats. Let's check it out. The horn lines continue on softly for a bit as Bryant starts to sprinkle in ideas that get his solo going. He has interesting flowing phrasing here, with lots of ideas bubbling in lines that stretch out. Things get sparse for the start of Weiss's solo. He builds it well, leaving you enough space to digest what you just heard. Strickland's fills underneath are just right too. And Glover is next. This is a long tune at 12 minutes and 18 seconds, and she has more than 4 minutes to stretch out, taking her time. And the climax gets some artful strangulation sounds and a lot of excitement. So let's check out the ending of her solo. And there's those opening bass figures taking it back into the melody, and it fades out over the repeating horn lines. Track 3, another Weiss original, The Other Side of the Mountain. There are a lot of changes to this tune. It begins with a pretty rubato opening with rippling piano and drum fills under legato horn lines for the first minute. Next comes a clicky straight beat section for the harmonized horn melody with Weiss taking the lead. It sounds like some mixed meters on the way. Things get animated for an interlude with some drum action from Strickland before the horns are back. A sudden switch to swing over walking bass gets Glover started on a tenor sax solo, and there's a switch back to the straight beat and then to swing again. Weiss is next with a nice arc of development to his solo. Let's check out some of Myron Walden's solo on this tune. Exciting stuff there. Brian gets the last solo, showing off a fine touch with lots of ideas. The melody from After the Rubato intro is back with a fading vamp to end it. Track 4 is a Freddie Hubbard composition, Rebop. It was unreleased, but Weiss transcribed it from a live performance for this recording, which is pretty exciting. And this is a lot of fun, with flurries of horn lines broken up by Strickland's drums and fits of swinging lines. Let's check this out. Fun melody there, and Glover's up first for a solo swinging hard. This tune will test your hard bop chops, so let's check out what Weiss does on it. Stuff, and Walden follows with another searing solo. I've been wanting to get a Bryant solo in as well, so let's check out his playing on this tune. to the controlled chaos of Hubbard's melody to wrap things up. Track 5 is another Weiss original, The Mirror, which is the title track from his 2004 album, reimagined here. It's an even beat tune with a neat arrangement. I'll give you a long sample to hear the whole melody. Check out the neat bass and piano left-hand line and how the saxes switch up from following the trumpet lead and the bass and piano movement. Glover has an intense solo on this one, and Weiss has a solo that builds up from a sparser backing, and Bryant has a great solo on this one as well. Track 6, another Weiss original, With Gratitude for Wayne, that's Wayne Shorter, who influenced his composition style. This has interesting horn phrases that change up in length from 5 beats to 7 to 9. It reaches a pause and then rises up with new lines. Let's hear it get started. There's still another minute of the horn arrangement to come from there, with different interval ideas and rhythmic ideas in the lines. Walden has a lot of room to explore on this one with some very energetic ideas. Let's hear some of his playing on this tune. Bryant changes up the mood with some lightness and floating ideas to get his piano solo started, and we get to hear the horn melody again to a slightly slowed ending. And the recording's going to end up with track 7, a tune written by Slide Hampton, previously untitled and unrecorded. It's called One for Boo, Boo being Art Blakey's nickname. There's some ominous minor modal fun in this tune. There's an 8-measure rhythm section intro, and then 8 more with swelling trills from the horns. The main melody is a hard swinging 24-measure melody that goes around twice. Let's hear it. Bryant solos first, and then Glover getting some extra push from backing horn lines. Let's hear one more Weiss solo, which he picks up from Glover's final phrase. Walden has a great solo too, and then Strickland has a go on the drums before a couple final rounds of the exciting melody. Challenging and satisfying on multiple levels, David Weiss brings us 4 new compositions packed with interesting horn arrangements and lots of harmonic surprises, building on the post-bop tradition. There's also a reworking of Weiss's The Mirror from 20 years ago and previously unreleased originals from Freddie Hubbard and Slide Hampton that excite you. Bryant, Wheeler, and Strickland are a tight and hard-driving rhythm section, whether swinging or playing straight grooves with standout piano solos from Bryant. The solos from Weiss are all inspired and searching for something new, and the sax styles of Glover and Walden complement each other and turn up the heat with their own reaching solos. A really great recording.
I thought so too. In fact, this is the kind of album that I really like in jazz because it's got extended tracks, so the soloists get a lot of room to solo.
Right.
And they take it here, and there's some really good ideas. In fact, I wanted to mention at the beginning, Myron Walden makes this really big statement right away when he comes in for the first solo of the opening track, Too Little Too Late. He's really just
wearing away. Fire, yeah.
Yeah, I know. It was really amazing. I like DJ Strickland's hard-hitting drumming throughout. He gets solo peaks in from time to time, and he's often accenting certain things that the soloists are doing, but gets his only full-on solo on the final track, One for Boo, and of course he's hard-hitting there and very exciting, I thought. I noticed that Nicole Glover, on this album, she tends to build her solos the same way. On each track, she'll start with this light, mellow tone and then gradually build to that hoarse, loud, high tone, that she has. And she does it in different ways and uses a different approach in One for Boo, the final track. But hearing all these tracks back to back where she kind of starts the same way, it was interesting for me. Okay, she's got that, mindset here. So we kind of heard her, the way she builds a solo. Right. David Weiss's tone is clean, well manicured throughout, even in naughtier passages. And I found his playing really exciting. Like right at the very end, we heard that sort of single note that was kind of...
false fingering, yeah.
Yeah, that was really amazing. It was really fast. It was, really exciting record all around. This is more in line with a traditional jazz album where the soloists get a lot of space to play. It's post-bop, it's exciting. It just made it really exciting for me. I think it's an genuinely exciting record.
Yeah, it's great. Only 7 tracks, but they really stretch out, so everyone gets to speak their mind, so...
They're very satisfying, too. Even, melodically, the themes are great. I really like it.
Interesting compositions. It'll take you a few listens to get these tunes inside your head, so that's always a good thing.
Even better. That's why you get an album.
Exactly.
That's why you buy records.
Yeah.
So you can hear them again and again.
Yeah, really exciting with the 3-horn lineup. I'll be interested and waiting to see what he does next.
Yeah.
All right, that's going to wrap things up for episode 184 of Adult Music. As always, we want to say thanks to Fast Signs of Staten Island for our glowing neon logo. We've already got a lineup for next week. So what's on the classical menu, Mike?
Yeah, well, as you mentioned, we're going to do the new Wranitzky Naxos release from the Czech Chamber Philharmonic Orchestra, conducted by Marek Stilets. And our friend Daniel Bernardson wrote the notes for that. He really got me into Wranitzky anyway, so I'm kind of still going with that. So I'm interested to hear this. I found this album called Virtuosi by Romain Leloup and Thomas Leloup. I'm not sure. I imagine they're brothers, but I haven't read the notes yet. But trumpet and tuba. And these are arrangements of works from the Baroque era up to, some more, modern works. Curious to hear what that's going to sound like. I really do love the tuba, so.
Right. That'd be interesting.
Good to hear that. And a composer that I really love, who's challenging nevertheless, Sofia Gubaidulina. She's a Russian composer. Still alive, too. She's in her 90s now. I mean, I think her 93rd birthday is coming up in October. 2 works from her, the Triple Concerto for Violin, Cello, and Bayan, which is a button accordion, and a work called Rejoice for violin and cello. So curious to hear more of her music. A lot of it's been recorded now, but still there's a lot more, and I'm really always happy to hear these. I want to give people a chance to hear them.
All right. Sounds interesting. Can't wait to hear that new Wranitzky.
Yeah.
On the jazz side, well, there were a couple releases with big-name players that came out this Friday, but we're not going to talk about them. I want to go a little bit deeper and find some new stuff that people won't hear talked about other places. The first one is a pianist, Bryn Roberts. He's made a name for himself with other types of ensembles, but I believe this is his first piano trio recording. It's called Aloft on Elastic Recordings, so I'm looking forward to checking that out. We're going to go over to Italy. Giuseppe Campisi, a bassist, and he's got a new quartet recording on Fresh Sound Records called Somewhere. So check that out. And while we're in Europe, we'll jump over to Germany to hear trumpeter Matthias Spillmann and his trio. It's a cordless trio. We'll have to work on my German pronunciation. Wachturm, I believe is the title. I think there's sax on here as well as a guest, but it'll be a little bit interesting sound environment with some trumpet. All new players for me to check out, and that's what I like best about picking recordings for the podcast. Any final words, Mike?
Yeah, I'm just thinking that I'd like to spend another evening in Vienna in 1784. And
and then go over to Greece.
Yeah, and go over to Greece and set up there. Yeah, that wouldn't be a bad way to spend the rest of our lives for us. We got to get out there and just stay.
Until those days come along, we'll have to do it virtually through the music that we listen to. Not a bad way to spend the time in the meantime.
Not a bad place to be here in Japan. It's pretty calm. I like it here.
I like things peaceful. All right, all those recordings that we just mentioned that we'll start listening to from tomorrow. If you want to listen along with us during the week, you can find them all in one place on our Deezer playlist. That'll be up a few hours after this podcast episode is published, and there'll also be a link to them from our Facebook page. That wraps it up for episode 183. We'll be back with 184 again next week. So until then, keep listening, and we'll see you next time.